the missed opportunity so far is to understand for the Securities and Exchange Commission in different field offices, EPA, different field offices, for a manager at a certain level with different operating units and components of 10, 15, 20 people. What does that tell you? And we haven't tended to look at the information at that kind of a granular level. And what we do know is that even though we can't get access to it because it's privileged down at that level, we do know that there are some units that, I think the technical term, really suck. That there are some places where almost everybody says this is a bad place to work. That would be a problem. And what we know is that low levels of employee engagement are connected with low levels of employee performance and big problems of organizational health. And so if I'm a manager operating at the field level, and I have a couple of my units that are really troubles, and some that are maybe better, and yes, we want to pay attention to the response rates, but maybe there's some stuff that we need to do right away, because this is a problem that signals big difficulties in performance. Because if you have a work unit where large numbers of people in it don't feel engaged, don't feel that they're really contributing, you've got a problem that leads to risk management issues and lead to problems of performance. And so one of the things that is important is the ability to be able to get down to that level and be able to drive improvements in results. And on top of that, for the first time, as I said, ever, the people at OMB, they have this massive spreadsheet, and they can look down to work units of 10 people from OMB at headquarters and understanding what kind of variance there is as well. So we need surely to improve the response rate, so we make sure that we in fact are capturing stuff that's real. We need to look at the variations of response rates to see if that tells us something about just underlying problems of engagement with engagement. But the other thing that we need to do is understand that we can, if you're a manager, you can look at some of these things and understand variations among your units, and that OMB simultaneously can do this at the same kind of time. This is a wildly different approach to organizational performance than we've had previously, and it's made possible by the transformations in the way in which the information develops, the way in which it's used, and the way in which it's possible to have conversations that just simply were never possible before.
This is a good instance to focus on of the challenge of using data to manage differently, and it illustrates some of the potential pitfalls and the need for education, especially senior managers, how to interpret data properly and apply it. In my mind, the EBS data, if it's used to identify a potential problem within an agency, is really only just a starting point. It shouldn't be over-interpreted. You need to then dive deeply into that and say what's going on here. It could be the supervisor's problem. It could be something in procurement that's external. It could be the lack of resources. It could be a wide variety of things that together are creating a place where you wouldn't want to work.
Thank you. If I could just add one more point about this. I've been concerned that everyone looks at employee engagement. I mean, first of all, I'm thrilled that we're paying attention to employee engagement. I mean, if you look at the history of this, back when the partnership first started doing best places to work in 2003, nobody wanted us to rate and rank. And so we basically went about the business of saying, okay, how about if we just identify the top 10? And everyone else said, fine, no problem. We identified the top 10. What happened? Everyone started calling us and saying, where are we on that list? And we said, well, wait a second, you either only see the top 10 or you see all of them. And that's how we started rating and ranking all agencies. The fact, a lot of the things we talk about, we say are really difficult to make happen and that they're going to take a long time to happen. I never would have guessed that in 2003 we start something like this, and then by 2005 agencies want plaques in every lobby. They want a logo on every website that says they are a top agency in terms of best places to work in government. People started talking that language. So things can happen with the right incentives, with the right information, and the way in which we do this in terms of not beating them up, but actually using it to help them. But I've been worried that we've looked at employee engagement as an end in and of itself, and I think that's why our report is so important. to say, no, 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 it's only one component, and why we need to be thinking about health. We need to be thinking about organizational health, where engagement is only one component of that. It's important, it's valuable, it is a trigger for a lot of other things, but it's also an indicator of a lot of things. The 45.5%, I think everyone's concerned about that declining and not really knowing for sure why. But one of my issues with this is the question on the survey that says, do I believe my organization will do anything with this survey? And I think we need to be connecting those dots, because I think the decline could very easily be that for many agencies, they've used the employee survey data as identifying the solution rather than understanding the problem, right? So they come up with a lot of solutions, they implement them, they want to give themselves a lot of credit for doing that, and no one's stepping back and saying to them, wait a second, have you really fixed the problem or not? And if the staff don't feel engaged and involved, if this isn't part of this up as well as down sort of contribution to this whole organizational health issue, then I think we're going to see the employee survey go away, because people are going to say it's not worth it. It's not important to my organization, so why should I waste my time?
Well, what's really interesting and encouraging about what OMB has done is they didn't launch into solutions in the President's Management Agenda. They are now digging deeper and looking closer. The interesting thing is, in the private sector, employee engagement surveys are done on a much more systematic basis. It's not done once a year. It's almost like pulse surveys of different units, and it oftentimes is tied to, we had a change in leadership, or we had a major reorg or something. So they use it strategically. They don't just try to do a census every year just to do it. So they're doing it that way. The other thing that's interesting in the private sector is that the response rate sometimes is the only thing that managers look at, because the presumption is if managers on the front line are using the survey data to respond to their employees, the employees are going to feel like, okay, this is worth responding to the survey, so I'm going to fill it out. So if they see a decline in survey response, that means they think that the managers on the front line are not using the data, and so the employees don't think it's worth filling. So that's how, in the private sector, they target where they need to be spending some attention.
Good. Nancy. Hi, we have a question from the line here. So this is from Miriam Cohen, who's Chico at US NRC. She wants to know if you can speak more of the culture issue and how it's addressed in the report.
So the question, in case anybody didn't hear it, is the Chico at the NRC asks about the connection between what we're discussing and culture. And let me come at it and just start the conversation in a couple different kinds of ways. The first is that culture surely is connected with organizational health. And places that have cultural problems are also places that have serious problems with the health of their organizations. And one of the best ways to try to improve organizational culture is to improve its overall health in all the ways that Judy discussed. And understanding it's a rich kind of phenomenon. Look at then the question of transforming the culture if you're a manager. And one of the things that is possible is, again, to try to say, one of the things that the partnership contributed was, wow, NASA is a really cool place to work. What is NASA doing that I'm not? But what if we drilled a little bit more deeply? Suppose that you're in the VA and you have, whether it's employee viewpoint survey or other measures, for example, the level of hospital-based infections. And you can understand the operational things that really matter. And some hospitals do better than others. Why? What is it that some hospitals are doing that other hospitals are not? How can we focus on things that we know matter in terms of the people we're trying to serve, veterans, that some hospitals are doing better than others? Is anybody here working for the VA who doesn't want to improve care for veterans? Anybody who does that, put up your hand. Nobody? I didn't think so. So what is it that some hospitals are doing better that are not? And focusing first on the outcome. Second, creating a language for focusing on outcomes. Third, saying, we can learn about how to do this better. And fourth, it's kind of exciting for us to join together in an effort to try to focus on the things that really matter and transform our organization. At that point, you're changing the culture, you're improving the performance, you're improving organizational health, and you're using the language of data to try to drive it. And I think we don't want to obsess over FEVs as we've been discussing, because in some ways we talk about it because that's the only kind of thing we've got to point to. But if you're running the VA, there are lots of things that are like that vary hospital to hospital, that you can identify, focus on, use to transform, and change the culture. You can drive it from the top down so it works better from the bottom up, where the bottom up informs what it is that people at the top need to know how to drive. And that's the kind of thing that I think we need to focus on more, and not just obsess over FEVs as if it's somehow the gold standard or this kind of holy grail of the language. It is only one example, and the problem is it's the only one that we tend to use because it's in some cases the only one we've got.
So I think we don't spend enough time understanding what our culture is. I think we spend a lot of time talking about aspirationally, where's the culture, what's the culture we want to get to. And if we don't understand where we are now, we really don't know some of the obstacles for getting to where we want to be. Now, because FEVS, we have this, 10 years, more than 10 years, 12 years worth of data, 13 years worth of data. So we have data that agencies could be using as a way to longitudinally understand what's been happening over that period of time. I don't know of many places, I think HHS may be the only place I've heard of, where they've been trying to understand what's changed over time and where has maybe our culture, they aren't maybe perhaps not using that word culture, but where have we shifted and changed that is actually positive, and where maybe we're shifting and changing that isn't consistent with where we'd like to go, so that we can isolate some things that have happened over time. Instead of just looking at this year and where are we this year, and perhaps looking at it in comparison to last year, did we get better, did we get worse? I think that's way too narrow when we talk about culture. But I think part of the work that I'm hoping agencies will do as a result of the PMA and what OMB is encouraging agencies to do is to assess their current culture. What are the things that are going on that define who they are? And there's some really great things that are that define a culture of an organization we don't want to throw away. We don't want to change. In fact, we want to be really careful about how we talk about it, because we could probably lose a lot of change management momentum if we don't respect some things that are really valuable about the culture. But then there may be other issues, like we don't understand our processes in a way that we allow practice to give us no answers all the time, rather than, is it a law? Is it in regulation, right? Is it a policy, or is it a practice? Are we allowing historical practices to drive decision-making, and, well, this is the way we've always done it, so we're not going to change? Or do we really think about, in a more analytical way, where are our vulnerabilities, or where are our opportunities to change, to transform the actions we're taking so that we can make better decisions? And in doing that, we actually, in a very nice way, begin to shift the culture of how we make decisions.
I'd encourage everybody to visit the website. So there's a ton of information on the NAPA website that you can go and pull down and read and do some assessment. You had a question?
Sean Miller from Evans Incorporated. Just back to the employee engagement topic quickly. I'm thinking about, the low response rate across agencies, and that was something that we had talked about earlier. And I'm wondering, just what data do we have on how leaders in these agencies engage their employees? Because I'm thinking about the power that leaders have and the ability that they have to connect employees to not only their day-to-day work and milestones and things like that, but also to activities like a survey and, provide that meaning in that context and how this can be great for them.
There
So I'm
are
curious what
questions.
data there is.
I think there are some questions in the survey about leadership, but I think the way they're crafted, it may not be clear what the referent is.
But
Leadership at what
that's
level?
what they're changing in the current
So they're
survey.
trying to fix
Yeah.
that kind of.
But the other thing is that OPM has created tools to help managers by providing them these kinds of data. And what's fascinating to me is how few managers actually use the data. I think that they said that the OPM said that for the data sources they had, that something like 5,000 people across the government actually turned down to use it. Now, some agencies said, well, our human resources people downloaded it and shared it with the rest of the agency, so that may not be an accurate number, but it feels very small. But OPM has created a toolbox for managers to use on this? And also, Judy, didn't the partnership do a lot of in-person conversations with agencies?
Well, but the big thing to answer your question is that the partnership, we have 10 categories that we analyze, and we look for key drivers based on 3 questions that we're using as our index for engagement. So when your engagement score is high, what else is going on in the responses of these individuals in terms of what's high, what's low? And what we found through regression analysis is that leadership, and this is senior leadership, not immediate supervisor, but senior leadership is by far the most important driver to engagement. And when you dissect that leadership group of questions, what we see are issues like communications and helping people understand why their work matters, and connecting the dots between strategy, which is what we say in the report, strategy and your job. So clear line of sight between what I do and where the organization's priorities are going. So there are a number of things that the survey does allow agencies to understand about what leaders could be paying more attention to. But again, it only gives you an indicator. It doesn't really give you the solution. But it does point very directly that senior leadership is probably the most important key driver.
Let's talk a little bit more about leadership, because I think it's a particular challenge in the federal government. And as Judy says, one of the lessons, not only from federal government experience, but from private organizations, is the importance of a leader that's committed to this kind of performance-focused change. And the federal government, we have leaders at the highest levels who come and go very quickly, who are amateurs in government in many cases, who have their own personal agenda, who may not be particularly interested in how their organization even works at lower operating levels in some cases. Or there may be a missing person, a key person that's not there for months or years at a time, as we've seen recently. So there's a problem of leadership, or the absence of leadership in some cases. So we have to solve that problem if the strategy is going to work effectively in the federal government when leaders are coming and going and not having the kind of engagement that you might see from, say, Secretary of HUD Sean Donovan was really engaged in driving performance, focused on that in HUD. But you don't necessarily have a Secretary of HUD like that at all times. So you have to figure out who's going to be the leader, who's going to inspire people. Maybe somebody at a career level, senior career level, is maybe the person you want to focus on.
I actually think we need to be focusing on the career, not just the career FCS, but those managers, those line managers and program managers. They have to understand why this should matter to them, not so much how it matters just to the organization as a whole or the department, but how it matters to them and their ability to do their work better. I mean, I'm really concerned about the USDA example in our study, because it's a great example of how a leader, but it was a political leader, took charge and made this a high priority, and as a result, we saw a great improvement. One of the things I didn't mention was part of their strategy was it created these employee advisory councils where the employees could provide input, feedback, suggestions on things that they thought would help to improve employee engagement or just overall job satisfaction and performance quality. And one of them was work-life balance and ability to work remotely. Okay, so what has happened at USDA? We've got a whole new administration, and they're talking about completely revamping the changes that were made to these employees who said, this really matters to us. And now they're saying, well, maybe we will do away with remote, working at home, and bringing everybody back into the building. So that's why we've got to have a more stable structure and a strategy that gets us at the place that doesn't change all the time, and to help them get the tools and techniques for them to manage on a day-to-day basis in a way that everyone feels good. So that if there is this shifting wind at the top, maybe it's not as important if we're dealing with data and with good people management skills to get the job done, and that people are satisfied with the way their work environment is.
Good. We have a question on the phone.
Right. So it might be a controversial question, so I'm just going to read it as it is. So it's from Dave Kittross from CyberFeds. He noted that this is a positive document and discussion. How do you, or do you even have to ensure that employees don't believe all the talk of change and improvement is simply a Trojan horse to focus on one issue, which is making it easier to fire employees, which is what gets much of the attention in Congress?
You want to come up here and read that again so we can clearly hear? I mean, that was a lot, I was like, and I was confused, so.
Right.
But it's a really important question, just
for
so
the
the
people on the phone.
people on the phone can hear
Right.
this, because
They
it's
would
an
have
important
seen this,
issue.
They would have seen this already, so how do you, or do you even have to ensure that employees don't believe all the talk of change and improvement is simply a Trojan horse to focus on one issue, making it easier to fire employees, which is what gets much of the attention from us.
And let me dive into that first. The basic reality is that this is a crazy, wild, often upsetting, very turbulent, unpredictable time with one piece of prediction at the core, which is most of what government does, the government's going to continue to do, and it's going to need to continue to do better. We're still going to need to land airplanes. I don't want to be on final approach to Reagan National Airport and somebody says, you know what, I'm not feeling motivated today. Or that I'm going to go out and buy shrimp for dinner and discover that it's tainted because we don't have food inspection. Or that the rate of improper payments in Medicare and Medicaid is going to be going up. Or that I have to wait even longer for my refund from IRS. The fact is that most of what it is that government does, and most importantly, most of what government employees do, are going to continue to be done. And that is the basic, unchangeable basic reality of this. And so the fact is that it's tough out there, but here's sort of the chain. The first is that people are still going to work. Most of these laws have not been repealed. We still have an obligation to deliver services to citizens. So we know that sometimes we do it better, sometimes we do it not so well. We know that it's possible to understand the difference increasingly by looking at the data and the ways in which we've suggested. We know that we can improve the results by using the data to try to improve organizational health, and healthier organizations provide better services. We know that people want to go to work and do this, and they want to be excited about their jobs, and that most of them understand that, yes, even though there's all this stuff flying around up here, is the equivalent of looking at a very small, very intense hurricane with big impact in a relatively small area that outside the immediate eye wall doesn't really affect people much at all, except that it changes the environment where people have to go to work and do what it is that they do. We can do what we do what we do better. What we've demonstrated, and what Judy's example shows, is that the leaders, and not necessarily only political appointees, can move the needle. When you move the needle, it works, it matters, you can do it in a way that sticks. And the thing that we haven't talked about is that there are citizens out there who notice this, and when they notice it, their trust, maybe not in government as a whole, but their trust in the transactions they have on particular things actually matter. And so I'm pretty hopeful about this stuff. I'm pretty hopeful because most of what it is that we do, we're going to need to continue to do. We're going to need to continue to do it better. We can do it better. It'll be more fun to go to work if you do, and citizens will appreciate it. That's pretty good.
There's a lot of disruption, but another reassuring sign is in the President's management agenda itself. A lot of the vocabulary, the routines that were established under the GPRA Modernization Act and the previous administrations continue. A lot of the agenda is focused on the same perennial problems, the procurement and human capital. A lot of the vocabulary for the CAP goals, the cross-agency performance goals, is the same. Sometimes the target's going to be recalibrated. But you could have imagined a very different scenario where a business-oriented administration with no particular investment in the past threw out all of that apparatus and say, we're going to have our own approach to improving government management by firing people or whatever. They didn't go that route. So at some level, in this very disruptive environment, there is some continuity and stability to basic management processes. That's reassuring.
Good. We have time for one more question.
Chad Burbert, and with Cicero Group, we do data-driven organizational transformations. So very fascinated by the report and what you have to say. I'm looking at one bullet here and just want you guys to comment about kind of the pay-for-performance link. I noticed you had a point in your report about use the data not for judgmental reasons, but for continuous learning and improvement reasons. And kind of where do you come out on this pay-for-performance idea, and how are you thinking about it, and how does that factor into how OPM
That
is
wasn't a part of our report. It is something that's part of the President's management agenda. The flag that I look at is that over the past 20 years, it's been tried 3 times and been a failure 3 times, or at least perceived to be a failure and repealed by either administration or Congress. Not sure what a new effort like this might result in. So it's like they may talk about it more. I don't see some real action on it at this point. So we'll see.
Because we've got a situation where everybody's talking about it, there's a sort of buzz. We still haven't figured out how to do it, especially in the federal government. And so they're likely to continue to talk about it. They may even try to do it. It's not clear that they will solve the problems that have crippled it in past efforts. And not that it doesn't matter in terms of the rhetoric, but it probably matters a whole lot less in terms of performance. And so it leaves 99.8% of the rest of the world to focus on the things that we think really do matter in terms of moving the needle.
What's interesting is in the private sector, there's a strong de-emphasis on trying to make those kind of links, because there's an understanding that it's not just individuals that perform, but teams, and the team environment is even stronger in the public sector. So this notion
And I think that's implied in
Yeah.
Right,
our
exactly.
There are things we couldn't tackle, and perhaps if we'd had more time, we might have tried to tackle, like the issue of the blended workforce. We have many agencies at all levels, contractors sitting alongside federal employees, working together. We really didn't have time or ability to tackle that, but that's something that needs to be thought about.
And just a quick note, if I might, is a plug for a forthcoming NAPA report. We're currently working on a separate course. We had a report on civil service reform called No Time to Wait. And that report is available now on the NAPA website. We're now working on a phase 2 effort. And the phase 2 is going to be looking particularly at the question of trying to figure out how to advance government's mission, how to do that in a way that preserves merit principles, and how to do that in a way that redefines the nature of accountability, in a way that takes account of the nature of the changing work that we do, and that focuses on the right kinds of things, driving government into a higher performance environment. And so stay tuned, there's more work coming on all this stuff. And this is, as John said at the beginning, a long, long process. Judy pointed out just how long it's going to be, and Steve's been working on these things for a long time. And we're still in the game too on top of that, with another report coming during the summer to try to fill in another piece of this, we hope.
Another reason to go to the website, because again, there's a ton of information and it's always being updated with all of the reports and analysis, and again, a very useful tool to do that. And I want to thank our panelists. You guys have done great today with a lot of information, and a lot of people are kind of, the brains are now thinking about it and whatever, so there may be more questions, so I may be coming back to you to answer some of those, but appreciate your time. Thank you, and let's thank our panelists.